Good evening, everyone. Thank you for staying. We have a magnificent panel of people who've been deeply involved in these issues and in the film. So we're delighted to have a question and answer with you and a little bit of moderated conversation. My name is Peggy Clark. I'm a Vice President of Policy Programs at the Aspen Institute and run a program here called Aspen Global Health and Development when we work deeply on a lot of these issues. So first, I'd really just like to congratulate my panelists who were all very involved in this film and introduce you to them. And then we will have a little bit of a conversation here for a few moments. And then please, we'd love to hear your questions and hear your thoughts about the film. So immediately on my right, Shabana Basij-Rasikh, who is from Afghanistan. And we're delighted you're here with us. She's been able to participate in a number of the Girl Rising films. She's co-founder and managing director of the School of Leadership in Afghanistan. It's called SOLA. She is a remarkable person. She has, in her lifetime, won a number of awards. She's been named Glamour Magazine's Top 10 College Women of 2010. She's founded an organization called HILA, which is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to empowering Afghan women. She has been involved in helping Afghan girls to go beyond elementary school to secondary school and has done a lot of innovative things, which we'll hear about. She studied in the US. She studied at Middlebury College. And her deep passion is making the stories that you heard here come alive. So we're really delighted to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And to her left, we have a dear friend, Pamela Reeves. Pamela is a senior advisor to the Nike Foundation and a number of other corporations and private entities who are working closely on women and girls issues. She has had a very interesting background. She served as the U.S. State Department, at the U.S. State Department running the Fund for Women and Girls for a number of years and as a senior advisor on public-private partnerships. So she's deeply involved in getting private sector involved in these issues. Among the many things you've done, I met Pamela in Malaysia at the Women Deliver meeting where she was standing under a tree that the Nike Foundation had created that told the stories of girls. And she is dreaming a lot of big dreams about how to make these issues come forward. So Pamela, thank you for joining us. We have the magnificent Mona Eltahawy here with us. Mona is an amazing activist. She's looking for a protest over the next few days if anybody has any ideas. She's a freelance columnist and speaker. She was in Tahrir Square at the time of the revolution and was a frontline speaker who has a massive number of followers. And she talks very openly and honestly about the issues that women and girls face. She is a fearless woman. She was named Newsweek's 150 Fearless Women of 2012, among many other things. She's also been named one of the 100 most powerful Arab women by Arabian Business Magazine. She was also one of the writers in the film. You probably saw her name when the Egypt triad. And Mona told me this is the first time she's seen the whole film.
I cried throughout the whole thing.
So she cried for the whole thing, which is really, really wonderful. So Mona, thank you for being with us. You have a really important story to tell about this. And then we have Richard Robbins, who is the director of the film. Thank you, Richard, for joining us here. We're really quite honored to have you. Richard has a remarkable background. He's been nominated for Academy Award for a number of his films. He has been working dedicatedly 24/7 on this film for a number of years.
I do sleep.
He doesn't sleep very much. He cleaned up for you guys tonight, but that's about it. He spent his early career at ABC News and PBS's Frontline. He began directing his own documentary films with Peter Jennings' documentary unit at ABC News. He founded a critically acclaimed ABC series, The Century. He produced Peter Jennings' reporting LAPD and Peter Jennings reporting Dark Horizon, India, Pakistan, and the Bomb. His first theatrically released documentary, Operation Homecoming, Writing the Wartime Experience, was the one that you were nominated for an Academy Award for. And of the many things that you've done. And we're really delighted to hear your passion about this issue, and it was really fun to meet you today because I've heard so much about you. So with that, I'd like to really turn to the panel and ask you a few questions. And so those of you who are in the audience, please get your questions ready. I believe we'll have microphones in a few moments. But, you know, this is the first time I've seen the whole film as well. I've seen pieces of it, and I've been in a number of screenings of it. But it occurs to me these are really stories of bravery. And it also occurs to me in meeting all of you today that each of you has undertaken really acts of bravery just to do the work that you do with women and girls. So, Mona, could you just start by telling us a little bit about your own bravery and why this film is important to you?
I'd actually like to start by emphasizing Yasmin's bravery, because she was one of the girls that I was given to look at. The film crew had interviews with girls, and each writer from each country was given a few girls to see whose story she most could identify with. And the girl that I'd actually initially chosen was very revolutionary, would take trains to protests and would read the news every day, but sadly she disappeared and we don't know what happened to her. She was a street girl. So, and then I chose Yasmin, and by the time I got to Yasmin, I had been assaulted by Egyptian riot police in November of 2011. They broke both my arms and they sexually assaulted me, and I was detained for 12 hours. So when I was asked to choose another girl, and I saw Yasmin's story, I thought, you know, here's this incredible girl who's only 13 years old and she's survived rape. And, you know, here I am. At the time, I was 43 years old. So when we arranged for me to go and meet her, and you saw a clip at the beginning of the film where I was sitting on a swing, she had actually pushed me on the swing because both my arms were broken. And I had very stupidly and naively thought that I should take the casts off my arms before I go to meet Yasmin, because I wanted to protect her, which is really incredibly naive. Because in the end, she ended up teaching me so much and protecting me from the trauma that I had undergone before I met her. Because I didn't want this 13-year-old girl to think, you know, that 30 years down the road, I could still be a quote-unquote victim. And I don't consider neither Yasmin nor myself victims. I consider us survivors. But I wanted to show her this brave face, and it would have been utterly false. So I kept the casts, and I went to see her, and the first thing she said to me was, let's make an agreement. I'm going to open my heart to you, and you're going to open your heart to me. And she told me very honestly what happened to her. So then I told her, I realized when I was watching her story and remembering the details of her story, I had to tell her that the same police who were very unusually helpful in her story, because the police is not usually helpful in sexual violence cases in many countries, and particularly in Egypt. So I had to tell her that it was the police who assaulted me. And the first thing she asked me was, have you taken them to court? Have you sought justice? And I thought, my God, this girl's a firebrand. And I said, I'm working on it, Yasmin. She's like, do it. So this little girl ended up saving me. And Richard and I would often speak when we were discussing her story about where does this 13-year-old girl who's never had one day of education, who has nothing, where does she get this idea that she deserves justice? And when I look at Yasmin now, and I moved back to Cairo in March, I consider Yasmin and her story of survival and endurance and this determination for justice and this ability to say no to injustice. She's truly on the vanguard of our revolution. Because if the man called Mohamed Bouazizi, who set himself on fire in Tunisia, started this wave of revolutions and ignited our imaginations in the Middle East and North Africa, it's girls like Yasmin who will continue this revolution and complete this revolution. Because they now are turning to their societies and saying, you're taking care of the political stuff, but the social and the sexual stuff continues to oppress us. And I know that girls like Yasmin are going to make these revolutions work. So she's the courageous one. I'm lucky.
Siobhan, let me turn to you. Tell us a little bit about bravery in the work that you do. And we all have heard about the challenges with girls' education in Afghanistan, but you're really on the front lines of that work. So tell us a little bit about your own bravery.
Well, kind of following what Mona was talking about, it's really the girls that I work with that teach me about the importance of the work that needs to be done. I run a boarding school in Kabul city, and unfortunately I have to say it's perhaps the only boarding school of its kind for young girls in Afghanistan. And the students at my school come from, right now, 16 different provinces. Some from very rural areas, and all of a sudden, their education at SOLA is an alternative to marriage or not being able to continue with education because there is no high school in their village. And what is so amazing to me about their story is the fact that they have very, very supportive family members, and especially fathers. And you see in the stories of some of the girls in this movie, where in Roxana, who has a very supportive father, or the girl from Ethiopia whose brother stands up, and they become almost the members of the family who have very pivotal role in their opportunities in future. I will give you an example of, and this is something I share because I believe it's quite moving. One of my students recently, a few months ago, was on her way home for a holiday break, and when her father picked her up at the airport in the provincial center, and they were on their way to their home in the rural village, they missed being killed by a roadside bomb that was actually aimed at them. And when he got home, he received a phone call telling him, "How come you're still alive? I was planning your funeral. If you send your daughter back to school, we will try again." And this brave and strong father said in response, "Kill me now if you wish, but I will not stop my daughter's future because of your backward ideas." My daughter is going to go back to Kabul to continue with her education, and if it's in my fate to die in your hands, so be it. And actually, she not only came back to Kabul to continue with her education. 4 days ago, when I came to the States, I accompanied 9 SOLA students who were attending various boarding schools and universities here in the US, and she was one of them. And this, to me, is an example of how important it is to invest more, to shed more light on the supportive role that men can play in this cause. I do want to emphasize this, and I don't think we can say this enough, that investing in girls' education is not just about girls or women. It's the most inclusive cause we could embrace, and it's very important to all of us in this world, not just women, for families, for our communities, for our society, and for our world at large. It has the multiplying effect, and I don't have to convince you that you have seen this amazing documentary that talks about it. And in this, we should use this as an opportunity to talk about and to increase that platform where fathers can encourage more fathers to join this cause, and especially in places like Afghanistan and the so-called third world countries, to increase girls' access to education.
Wonderful. Thank you. Richard, let me turn. Beautiful. Richard, let me turn to you for a second. All of you spoke about the way that these stories were told, and in different ways. You all talked about this, and you said that you really were trying not to portray girls as victims, but they very much were the authors of their own story, and that the methodology and the vision for this film was very much that. And in the film, there's that beautiful moment when the one says, "I am a superhero," and the other says, "She is the author of her own story." And you, Richard, have talked about how the intent of this film was to inspire action, and you felt that using stories was the way to do that. Tell us a little bit about that piece. Why did you choose that, and do you think it has had an impact?
Well, I like to think that I'm a storyteller by trade, and all the things that I've done as a journalist or as a filmmaker or as a writer have been about trying to tell stories. And what seemed to me the specific goal of this film was to try and let the girls, as much as possible, tell you their stories, because these aren't stories that we hear very much. And they really are inspirational. I think anybody who's spent time traveling in the developing world has had this this sort of dual experience of feeling incredibly overwhelmed and depressed and really wanting to sort of turn away from the poverty and the struggle. But then you meet these unbelievable people who are inspiring and who restore your faith in humanity. And for me, that was what these girls did. And so I felt like, as much as possible, if I could give the audience that experience of meeting these girls who make you feel good. They don't make you feel depressed about what they're facing. They make you feel like they actually have a pretty good shot at making it if we can just get them a little bit of help. They're more determined, braver, stronger than most of us. And so, we need to figure out ways to, my goal as a filmmaker in some ways was sort of get out of their way. Or at least the appearance of getting out of their way, because they needed a lot of help to bring these stories to the screen. But I wanted to try and, convincing all of you that girls' education matters is pretty easy. The statistics speak for themselves. So the real goal of the film is to make you care enough about it that you'll do something. We all know intellectually it matters. The question is emotionally, what's going to push you over the edge from that knowledge to action?
And you've talked about, Richard, that you haven't had a normal distribution channel and that you've sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom and there's been hundreds and hundreds of screenings. What do you think is working, this alternative approach to distribution, and do you think there's been impact?
I do. I mean, we're busy trying to measure our impact. One of the best things that has happened in this process in terms of our relationship to the documentary film community is that part of the investment we got from Paul Allen's Vulcan Productions was specifically designed to measure our impact. Not something documentary filmmakers are very good at, but is crucial as we go forward with social action documentaries to be able to point to what we've done and say, look, this was our investment, this was our strategy, this is the outcome. We really do believe that metrics and empirically based work is valuable, not just in development, but in documentary. Right. So I think we've had success, it depends a little bit on, I'd always like more, more screenings, more awareness, but we've been pleased so far with how we've done.
Oh, that's great. The producer of the film, Tom Yellen, who I think is coming back to join us.
He's here.
Tom, he's here. He said that we should consider asking the audience if it made you feel guilty or hopeful. Is that right, Tom? Was that the question? And he wanted to know a show of hands. If people felt guilty?
You're allowed to feel both, too.
Yeah, you're allowed to do both. Did people have a feeling of guilt at the end of the film about the fact that young girls are encountering this kind of situation? A few. How about hopefulness? Oh, that's interesting. There's your validation. That's quite interesting. Let me turn to you, Pamela. Pamela, you've done such extraordinary work in the women's movement. And earlier today, you talked about to us that it was only in 1995 in Beijing when people said women's rights are human rights. Hillary Clinton said it. And then you went on to work at the State Department running the Fund for Women and Girls, and now you're very actively involved in engaging corporations in public-private partnerships. What can be done? What are some of the interesting things you're seeing, especially in terms of the role of the private sector, in terms of addressing some of these issues?
Well, Peggy, it's interesting that you talk about 1995, which was 18 years ago. That's all it was. And that was the moment when Hillary Clinton really sort of shocked the world. It was crazy to say that women's rights were human rights and human rights were women's rights. Now, if you talk to my 14-year-old daughter or my 16-year-old daughter, they'll say, of course, right? I mean, we've gotten that far. And I think the same is true for companies. There's a business case, there's a moral case to be made for investing in women and girls. And I will posit that companies have a sensitivity to both cases. So, we know more than we knew a while ago. We know that there is a great return on investment when you invest in a woman, larger in many cases than investing that same dollar in a man. We know statistically that when a woman makes $1, she puts 90 cents of that dollar back into her family, into her community, and a man often does half that. And these are women who live on $2 a day or less. And we know We know from Muhtar Kent, the CEO of Coca-Cola, that women control $21 trillion of consumer spending worldwide, which is very compelling. I think the companies there's a real recognition and a real respect for the idea that the girls and the women that they will become are a key to unlocking a thriving and prosperous world. And that really it's very simple. All we have to do is unleash the potential of 50% of the world's population.
And one of the things that has been one of the reasons that I think this issue has been as powerful as it's been in the last 24 months, I do feel like Americans in particular, but all over the world we've seen, people have a desire to do something that makes a difference. And so many of the world's problems seem insurmountable for the average people. Now, I would posit that everyone in this room can recognize a good school and a good teacher. This is not global warming. This is not deeply seated ethnic strife. This is not how you build responsible government. The kinds of problems that the Aspen Ideas Festival spends a lot of time trying to come up with answers to, we actually know what the answer to this problem is. We know what a good school looks like. We know what a good teacher looks like. This is an implementation problem. This is a scale problem. And that's part of why I think it's appealing to regular individuals and to corporations, because we know it works and we know how it works. So, there's not a lot more real deep solution hunting that we're involved in. We're involved in putting these solutions into action.
So isn't there a risk that this issue of girls' education is perceived of as a silver bullet and it's too much of a fad? And we saw in many of these stories the complexity of girls' sexuality and child marriage and health issues and the way that those influence things. And you talked, Richard, about how the tangibility of investing in girls' education is so important. And we're at this precipice. People are beginning to talk about, Bill Clinton at the Clinton Global Initiative said the one investment we should all make is in girls' education. Is it enough? Is it enough? Do you want to respond to that?
Well, I would say that when we look at some of the large corporate efforts on women and girls, we'll see Coca-Cola, 5 by 20. They've committed to economically empowering 5 million women by 2020. That's economics. Goldman Sachs with their 10,000 Women program. You've got Intel working on education, for girls and teacher training. And there are a number of technology companies that really understand the value of unlocking not just the market, but the potential that intellectually and in many other ways, in peace and security issues that women bring to the table. You've got, and I don't mean to exclude any companies, I'm just some that come to mind. You've got Merck and Johnson & Johnson and Abbott Labs working on health. You've got Unilever working on girls' self-esteem. Mary Kay on gender-based violence.
There's a number of things focusing on girls.
There's really I think, an understanding that education on its own is not going to solve the problem.
Right.
You can't do it without education. Health on its own, not going to solve the problem. And I think, one thing that the Nike Foundation has done with their Girl Effect platform is to convene ideas, resources, commitment to really a holistic umbrella view of the whole adolescent girl. Education is a huge part of that.
Good. I was really taken by that comment, and we're going to open it up to all of you in just a second, that Suma made, where she said, I've seen where change comes from. Suma from Nepal. It is like a breath moving through you. Once it starts, it cannot stop. So I think all of you are here with this film at the second day of Aspen Ideas Festival to inspire some change. What is some of the change that you'd like to see? Mona and Shabana, let me start with you, Mona.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke at a high school commencement in Portland, and the other reason I love Yasmin's story is because I can use it as a way to connect privilege to obligation. Because this was a private school in Portland, and when I speak about meeting Yasmin, I say that I've been very open about my sexual assault, and I could do that because I'm privileged enough to do that. I have a media profile. I'm now 45. People know who I am. I went to a therapist in New York. I went to an orthopedic surgeon to fix my arm in New York. I'm surrounded by privilege. And in that sense, it obliges me to work 10 times harder. And yet this girl who has nothing was very outspoken about sexual violence and her demand for justice. So I try to use those stories to inspire young people, especially when I'm invited to speak to young people, I consider it a great chance to brainwash them in the best way possible. And it's a great age to brainwash because you catch them at a moment before they fall over into the detachment and cynicism of early adulthood when they start off as freshmen, and it's really cool to be cynical and detached. And I hate cynicism. So when you catch teenagers and you tell them, you are so privileged, but don't think about what happened to Yasmin as something that happens over there. Don't think all the bad men and all the bad boys are over there. Sexual violence is a global problem. So it often also starts a conversation where when I speak about what happened to me, or I mention Yasmin, so many other girls will come and speak to me, and it's a great chance to have that difficult conversation about how to talk to our girls and young women about sexual assault, how to make it about over here and not just over there, because it's a problem over here too. And you'll remember after the Delhi gang rape, when everybody was talking about how terrible it is for women in India, and it is with sexual violence, we had the story here of Ohio, of the girl whose sexual violence was caught on tape by the boys from the football team in Steubenville, I think they were called. So we had to have that conversation about rape culture, about it here. So the way that I would want to inspire you is to not think of these problems, especially sexual violence, as something that happens over there, but something that is global, and how each of us can fight it. And there's two ways to fight. If you want to help girls in Egypt, find groups on the ground who are working, and there are many. There's a great group called Harassmap, which has a Kickstarter campaign right now, so you can help them with their money, help amplify their voices. But they don't want you to rescue them. The revolution is not about rescuing us. We're fighting on the front lines. The best way you can help is to fight sexual violence here. Strengthen girls here to understand that they deserve justice here, and we're taking care of it over there. That's how I want to inspire you.
Wonderful. Let's open the floor to all of you. We have a microphone right here, I believe. Questions, comments? We have an incredible group of panelists here. Anyone want to raise their hand?
I see someone over there.
Sir.
First of all, congratulations on the movie. It's quite powerful, and I think my reaction was not guilt or hope, but more of outrage. And it occurs to me, and I'll get to a question, but it's surprising to me from a Western or U.S. standpoint that we seek to reprimand different governments' behavior on a variety of issues, but certainly not when it comes to the treatment of women. And it's surprising to me that a lot of the examples really are courageous and brave because they're fighting against an embedded structure that we potentially, as the U.S., implicitly endorse or at least don't explicitly condemn. And I'm just wondering, maybe Shabana, from your perspective, is it actually counterproductive for the U.S. to make that such an agenda? Does it harden and reinforce the obstacles of Afghani girls and women if you have the U.S., which, as Mona points out, is not exactly pristine on this topic, lecturing the rest of the world? Or does it actually help to break down the structural barriers inside countries like Afghanistan?
Well, you can look at it from a few different perspectives. And in my opinion, when we talk about a global cause, let's say the fact that 66 million girls are waiting to be sent to school, it's a global challenge. And it's very dangerous for us to identify that or label that as a cultural problem. To say, you as an outsider go and talk to someone in Afghanistan and say, your culture is bad, this needs to be fixed. I'm all about solutions coming from within. Sustainable development has to be something that's started from within. And for us to look at this challenge, this global challenge of girls' lack of access to education, we should try to make sure we stay away from calling it a cultural problem. We should simply call it, a cultural norm. We should call it a problem. The fact that girls don't have access to education is a problem. It's not a cultural norm. Can you imagine the United States going through 30 years of war? Will you be sitting here? Will you be sending your daughters to school? Perhaps not. So the fact that illiteracy rate in Afghanistan for women is 90%, I don't consider that Afghans not being interested in education. It is just a product of war, and I mean, I'm 23. The war in Afghanistan is older than I am. So really making sure that as an outsider coming in, you call it a problem, then you give yourself an opportunity to do something about it. You know, and if you call it a culture or a cultural norm, then you tend to shy away from dealing with it, right? You tend to be respectful. There are a lot of diplomats who come to Afghanistan, and they are told to be respectful to Afghan culture. And if they also in their mind consider girls' lack of access to education and cultural norm, then they will never talk about it. But if you call it a problem, then you open an opportunity for yourself and for the person on the other side of the table to say, let's talk about it and how we can fix this. So I would say that would be, if you're talking about it on a global scale, we need to address it like that.
I would just add that from a U.S. policy point of view, you know, we have so many carrots, we don't need sticks. You know, I mean, the carrots are so plentiful. You know, the problems that these countries need help with are well within our grasp, and on a policy front, there's no reason for us to be, you know, look, women couldn't vote in this country 100 years ago, but it's not as though we're so far ahead. So, you know, I think there are plenty of carrots from a policy point of view, and we don't need to be in the business of lecturing anybody about how they could do it better.
I just want to add one thing. It's literally for the record, which is that under Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, the human rights reports, which the United States puts out every year, began to include how countries are treating their women on certain issues as part of the human rights report, which is a pretty interesting step to take.
Can I say something really
Yes,
quick?
please,
Because this issue makes me really angry, actually. There's a very fine line between cultural relativism, racism, paternalism, and a whole host of things. And unfortunately, when it comes to women's issues, a lot of the US's allies, Saudi Arabia is the first country that comes to mind, because I spent many years of my teen years in Saudi Arabia. Women's issues are considered this no-go area. And too many US administrations have said fine, and that is shameful. Women are used as the cheapest bargaining chips because these dictators around the world throw down words like, it's my religion, it's my culture, stay out of it. And that is crap, because if women's rights are human rights, then say, we're going to make our aid conditional on your respect of women's rights. And so many US administrations have been shamefully silent, including Hillary Clinton's US administration. I mean, I'm glad that we had a Secretary of State in this country who was a feminist, but she would go to Saudi Arabia, where women are treated like children. And what was said about women's rights, even if you get, now, the way to avoid the defensiveness, which comes out, is to act like these paternalistic rescuers who are going to come and save the women. It doesn't have to be like that. But if you point out and you shame these governments' records through the local voices, and there are plenty of local voices, but the local voices look at the US administration, as they do with human rights, and they say, we had 5 US administrations who supported Hosni Mubarak, with a terrible women's rights record, with a terrible human rights record. So you can't be hypocrites like this and say it's fine, do what you want to your women, because I didn't choose this to be my culture. This was a culture decided by patriarchy. As Richard said, we had patriarchy in this country, and you fight it. But you can't be hypocrites on this. Human rights are human rights.
Question right here, Randall.
Thanks, Peggy. So Randall Kempner, I'm at the Aspen Institute. Richard, I was surprised by your statement that this was just an implementation problem, we know what to do. And I would push back and say, I agree it's an implementation problem, but having just heard the last comments wherever you stand on the cultural piece, it's clearly not just a question of money. It's not just a question of training. And so I guess I'd like to hear more about what really can be done, knowing that it's going to probably be different across the various countries in which you did this work and across the world.
I'm probably an exception, and Mona and I have never had an opportunity to debate this, but I think it's primarily a question of money. You know, I'm one of those people that thinks that the cultural opposition to empowering women is fairly thin. You know, fathers don't want to send their daughters to school until you tell them that you'll pay for it. And then it's a really good idea. You know, even the Taliban was found to have been in secret sending their daughters to school. You know, I don't really believe that there is a huge body of people out there in the world who object to the idea of girls getting an education. I think they have anxieties about it. I think they fear what that education might lead to. But I found, you know, over many years of working on this project, very, very few people who said girls learning is a bad idea. I think those people are a lunatic fringe in the 21st century, and they ought to be treated as such. And I do think that the primary impediment is money. And to me, ultimately, you know, I think part of what Shabana is saying is that these conversations about how it's culturally sensitive end up being an excuse for not doing anything. You know?
I'd like to ask others if they agree with you about that. Do you think it's about money?
So I'd actually like to push back on that a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Because first of all, there is money out there, but the money is not going to go to something that isn't sustainable, isn't a good idea, isn't accepted, and can't be successful. But I would say that
I don't just mean to say like cash on the street.
No,
I mean,
I get what you're saying.
Sustained investment over a
Right.
long period of time, building a scalable structure. I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that this is simple, and if we gave everybody $10,
No.
it would be fine. But
But I have to say that first of all, there are 250 million girls living in poverty around the world. It's 250 million girls. It's a lot of girls. And in the countries of greatest distress, and in some of the countries that aren't in greatest distress but are in huge trouble, a girl is born and she is not given a birth certificate. Why? Because she doesn't count. Because she is not worth the paper that birth certificate would be printed on. And if she doesn't have a birth certificate, she's not getting into school. She's never going to vote. Forget that. She's not going to get her 12-year-old checkup. Right? I mean, it's a series of things. It's a lack of value of the girl that I think is what.
Let me ask Shabana and also Mona to come in on this, and Richard, I'll give you a chance, please.
I think when it comes to education, in some ways it is about the money, because if you look at it in Afghanistan, a lot of the aid and the focus has been on short-term, results-based projects, okay? There are even limits. If you can do the project within 6 months or a year, even better. Here's $2 million. But if you invest that money in education, you really have to have a generational perspective. Education is not the kind of project that's going to give you result in a year or two. Okay, you really have to believe in planting date trees. You're not going to have a date from that tree for the next 55 years. And if you don't take that approach, then that's where the educational sector suffers. Like it has in Afghanistan. It is unfortunately one of the most underfunded sectors, and it's shocking.
Mona, what do you think? You think it's about money, or is it deeper?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's about money, I think it's about culture, and I think it's about religion. And
Yeah.
hello?
The mic-
Oh,
there we
mine
go.
fell into my blouse, I'm sorry. I think it's a combination. Can you all hear me? Maybe I'll hold it. I think it's a combination of many things. It's a combination of money, culture, religion, and I say that, and I will bring it back to the US because, again, I don't want it to be about culture and religion over there. Those of you who watch Mad Men will be reminded on a weekly basis of what the United States used to be like. And there are many people in the United States now who belong to the Christian coalition and the religious right who want to bring back that kind of United States. And so when I talk about culture and religion, and I talk about the government that I'm fighting in Egypt right now, which is a Muslim Brotherhood president, I remind my fellow Americans, because I'm an Egyptian American, that we have a Christian Brotherhood here in the United States. And the Christian Brotherhood here and the Muslim Brotherhood over there share an obsession, and that is with our vaginas. And there's no polite way to say it other than that. Because as you've seen over the past week, we're not post-feminist, we're not post-racist. We have many problems in this country, despite the fact that we've had feminism, several waves of feminism. Now, we've had several waves of feminism in other countries as well, including my country of birth, Egypt. And so I bring up the Christian Brotherhood just to stop you from that temptation to think, oh, it's a cultural problem over there. We have cultural problems here too. There's a moral values crowd here too, even though our girls are educated here just like our boys are. So it's complicated. And I think at the end of the day, it's just as you were saying, the value of the girl child, but it's also the cultural view with which women are seen, women are perceived. You still have quite a large number of Americans in various conservative states who think that the father should be the head of the household. Now, there are systematic differences, obviously, between here and in Egypt, but really, if you're a religious conservative here and a religious conservative there, how do you look at girls and their value in the world? That's how you can end this whole cultural relativism and them and us, and consider the complexities of this issue, for me.
I just would just go back to the money issue and the question of a birth certificate, or the question of how we have come as far as we have in the United States, and say that, that cultural, the Christian coalition fell to the economic power of women. The reason that there's no birth certificate for those girls is because the birth certificate doesn't have value in the culture. There's a way to give it value. Invest in it, Put a financial reward on a birth certificate. Put compensation on getting girls into school. I mean, there is a very direct, immediate way to communicate that something has value, and that is to put money to it. And that money will be a great return on investment.
We have a question right here and one right here, and then unfortunately you are the devoted few here, but it's really burning the midnight oil for the organizers. But could I just take these 3 questions and then have the panelists respond to those? This gentleman here, you can go first, and then this woman. Oh, you have the mic, so you go ahead and go first, and then we'll hand it to Ben. Please go ahead.
One of the many engaging things about the film is that you had both positive aspects and very different aspects. And I think the issue of the culture of men, and that it's not cool to mistreat, much less be violent on women. And we have you from Nike now, and the degree to which any of you think that if you can get more men involved, and particularly respected men involved in championing women, I think we will be a lot further ahead. I can really relate to that Indian girl because my father was such a positive role model. And so I hope that as you go forward that you will focus as much on men as on women audiences.
Good comment. This gentleman right here has been patient.
This was a captivating film. Has it been screened in the countries that it featured? And the question is, if so, what was the unexpected that you observed from those screenings?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's just take the one last comment. I think it was this woman right here, and then we can hear from the panels and their closing remarks.
My question is, or comment, I guess, is similar to yours in that you mentioned the effect of like father figures and men as being important influences and factors in getting women educated. And if you find it at all problematic to focus on one gender over another when it seems like relating to issues we have in the States where it seems like there's a coalition of men who are trying to roll back reproductive rights, and that educating women is almost as important as educating men as to what like the effects of all of these things would be.
Great. Thank you. Comment.
Well, just very quickly on the question of screening outside of the United States. I was in India last week. We screened for a select audience there. It was, frankly, not that different from the screenings that we've had here, and we were screening mainly for a fair, policy crowd in New Delhi. I did steal away for a day and go to Kolkata and see Roxana, because it seemed crazy to go all that way and not see her. And she had just screened the film with her family and a whole bunch of people in her community. And that was quite remarkable to hear what they thought. Many of the girls who, when we were making the film, they'd never seen a film. So a lot of the stuff that we were asking them to do didn't make a lot of sense to them. And in just a little tiny behind-the-scenes window, I was always trying to be encouraging to them. So when we had to do things multiple times, I always insisted that it was our fault, that they had done nothing wrong. And I think they came to believe we weren't very good at our jobs because we had to do those things so many times. So I think they were quite pleased to see that the film turned out well. They had grown to believe in our incompetence. The most exciting thing for Roxana, actually, was the other girls. She really wanted to know about the other girls. And it's been one of the most gratifying things about showing the film, even in this country, is the strong reaction from young women and the sense that you're part of a global community of young women who are engaged in very important work, and that there is very important work still to be done here, there, and that, you know, I mean, one of the reasons that I love Mariama's story in Sierra Leone is that she is so much like an American teenager. There's really, and she's one generation, you know, she's the first generation in her family to go to school. She got to be an American teenager listening to Rihanna like that. So there's not a big divide between our girls and those girls. They're all just our girls. And Roxana's understanding of that, being a girl who lives on the street in Kolkata, was pretty exciting to me.
Other comments, the questions about men and the others. Shabana, you want to go next?
Well, I guess I will be just in some ways repeating myself to say, you know, it is important. Everybody here or anywhere can relate to many of these girls, and especially when there's a supportive figure, especially a father or a brother there. I can tell you that in Afghanistan especially, a lot of women who are very successful, they will always tell you about a very supportive father or a brother or a husband who's always there for them in terms of, you know, being that you can do it figure, or removing obstacles from the way. You know, in some communities, if a father says, my daughter can do this, then a lot of people will shut up and not create problems for you. So it can be that influential, and it is important. You know, I've been speaking in different places, and I try to talk about the importance of involving men and fathers in this conversation. It is the time. If we want to get those 66 million girls back into school fast, we need to involve men. We need to involve those families and those men who are insecure about girls' education or have concerns and anxiety about it. We need to just show other role models, educated women who've been successful, who've been independent, who've been helpful, and it makes sense in, you know, economically, socially, politically, for the country, for the world, for communities, for families. And I think this, if anything, this documentary helps us realize that even more.
Can I say something really quickly?
Yeah, please.
I would like, okay, I'm going to hold this because it's going to drive me crazy. As much as I agree with my fellow panelists on involving men and brothers, because societies are made of men and women, I don't want it to be, it's all dependent on the fathers and the brothers. I want it to be about the girls. I identify as a feminist. I don't identify as a humanist. It's not because I hate humanity, but it's because I focus on women and girls. And I think so many times we end up making the story, when it's supposed to be about girls, we end up making it about boys and fathers. And this is about girls. And again, to bring it back to the US, when you see what Wendy Davis did in Texas and how excited so many young women and women generally in this country are, and it inspires men too, but I don't want it to be about Rick Perry. I want it to be about Wendy Davis. So I want it to be in Egypt and all these other countries, about all these girls and women knowing that they can do it. And yes, having a supportive father will help. Yes, having supportive police officers who believe you will help. But at the end of the day, I want it to be about these strong girls who see feminists, who tell them that it's possible to do this. And through that, we change society.
Sorry, just to be really clear, because sitting next to Mona has emboldened me, investing in boys' education does not have the same return. We are not after women because they're more unfortunate. Empirically, it's very clear that investing in girls' education is a better return on investment than investing in boys' education. I wish, as a man, that were not true, but the facts are quite clear. There's a reason to do it.
You went to, right? Let me just stop for a moment here to say really congratulations to Richard and Tom on a stunning, stunning, stunning piece of work, really quite beautiful. So we would like to applaud that. And we're honored to have it here at Aspen, really honored. And I also want to say it's been just a real honor and a privilege to be sitting with Mona and Pamela and Shabana, and the work you do inspires us all. I think I would ask the audience to carry with you the stories of these girls to every session you go to at Ideas Festival, whether it be on the brain or space or policy or whatever it is. We try hard to keep the issue of women and girls on the agenda at Ideas Festival. Sometimes it's not of great interest to all of us. So we hope you all will carry forward. If you want to take the film and show it in your own venue, is that right, Richard? Yes. It's open source. How do you refer to it? Open source or crowdsourced?
Yes.
What's the plug?
GirlRising.com. There's a lot of information about how to screen the film in your community, school, corporation. You know, if you want it, we'll get it to you.
Right. So this is not the end. This is just the beginning of the story. So I'd like you to join with me in thanking our panelists on this great conversation. Thank you. Thank you all.